Guys, welcome to the podcast. I've got a really special guest here today, a person that I look up to for advice, a person who knows a lot of stuff that you're going to want to know. And I think this conversation is going to be a multi-part conversation. I certainly hope so. And I'm just going to bring him on. I'm not going to say what we're going to talk about, but we're going to talk about something that I guarantee you at 1,000% you're going to love it. Ron, thank you for being here. Ron Panna.
Thank you.
And you're the guy who I've asked you advice so many times on dog stuff, on health. Let's talk about your mission, which I think it is really your mission, to get dogs to live forever, right?
Yeah, that's definitely of interest. And, really, I guess, honestly, I'm also interested in that in humans too. And dogs are just a really good model to learn fast.
Right.
So that's really how it started.
So you started out, now you had a company that was pretty amazing called Quest. And talk to me a little bit about Quest, because I think that was your delve into this whole idea.
Yeah, that enabled a lot of stuff. So I guess 2010, we started a company called Quest Nutrition. We started with a protein bar and ultimately became a food company that was really focused on foods that were low in carbs, high in protein, fiber, et cetera. So really foods that had a certain metabolic impact when you ate them. So things would look like a pizza. We launched a frozen pizza as an example. Our pizza had no carbohydrate. And if you look at what's pizza made out of, flour, it's the one ingredient we didn't have flour. So we did things with protein powder and things like that. And that company grew very quickly. We went from 0 to 400 million in sales in like 4.5 years.
Wow.
And ultimately sold that about 18 months ago. And that, obviously generated a lot of cash that we were able to do some really interesting things and answer some really interesting research questions with.
And one of those things is something that, the way I found you, which is the Keto Pet Sanctuary.
Yep.
And this is something that you founded yourself. I mean, you're a company. You put your money into this.
Yep.
And I just want to talk about this whole idea with dogs' health, right? Like I always thought, well, dogs seem to only eat one thing in the wild, or the canine theory really only eats meat.
Yeah.
Right? Now they might eat the intestines of another animal. But my thought in this is kind of interesting, and it's what you kind of delve into in this with this fats and proteins diet. Tell me how you stumbled on this, or what made you think like this can actually cure, I don't know if we can say cure cancer, but you've shown it to really halt the growth of cancer and stuff like that. Talk to me a little about that, how you figured this out, what made you jump into this, and why this is so huge.
Well, I'm interested in nutrition, mostly human nutrition. That's what I was really focused on. And there's something called the Warburg effect that I learned about in 2009, really, which is essentially that cancer cells like glucose, and they burn glucose, and they don't really seem to be paying attention to protein and fat, really. And it's been kind of a hallmark of cancer for about 100 years. And if you oversimplify it, a lot of people were saying, you just got to starve cancer cells of glucose and you got the problem solved. And It seemed like, that's interesting. Let's kind of put that to the test. Ketogenic diets, this is back in 2014. So keto now is a big thing. I mean, people know about it. Kim Kardashian's on a keto diet. So I think that's effectively mainstream. But back then it was very strange. It was a diet that started in 1920 at Johns Hopkins, and it was used for epileptic kids that had a lot of seizures. And they found that if they put people on this strange diet, which was high in fat, moderate protein, very, very low carb, kids stopped seizing. And it wasn't like it worked pretty well. It worked better than drug protocols. So, I was interested in this, and they were starting to talk about in some research circles, ketogenic diets and cancer. And I would say, hey, can I see the PET scan? Can I get the information? And, I can't really, I don't know, the person doesn't have it. So I was never able to really get the data. So I kind of got frustrated and I said, why don't we just take dogs? I love dogs. And the dog model is a heck of a lot better than a mouse or a rat model, because you're looking for dogs that have naturally occurring cancers. The biggest killer of dogs is cancer. They have a high rate of cancer. So I said, let's do it. And I looked into it. And the long story short, we ended up with a 53-acre ranch in Texas because we had to get a radioactive materials license, because one of the things I wanted to do is use PET scans. So PET CT is the gold standard in human medicine for determining if a person has cancer and watching progression of the disease. Essentially what you do is, if I lay you in a machine and you're at rest, you should be burning 100% fat. So if I inject you with radioactive glucose and I look at which cells take that up and start burning it, if I see, for example, a spot in your lung, probably have lung cancer. If I see it in your pancreas, you got pancreatic cancer. So the very definition of how PET scans work is at rest, you should be uptaking fat, and you're not going to see that. If there are any cells that are burning a lot of glucose, you'll see that as a hot spot on the PET CT. And I said, why don't we do that? I didn't realize that they don't use PET CT in veterinary medicine because it's too expensive. So we got our own PET scan at a cost of about $50,000 a month. Wow. And we show up with this PET scan in rural Texas. Everyone thought we were crazy, but it worked really well because you could basically, first you had to go to kill shelters. Mm-hmm. Then you had to find a dog with cancer, which I thought would be pretty simple because if they see a dog with cancer, they put it down.
Yeah.
So we'd say, hey, before you kill that dog, let us take it. We had a lot of difficulty recruiting dogs because they were like, well, how do we know what's going to happen to this dog? And could be in a fighting, tournament or something. It's a 10-pound Chihuahua. I mean, that took really about a year to really overcome that process, make friends. And, but once we did it, we had dogs, we didn't cherry pick them. We took anything we could get. And we had dogs with very advanced cancer that died 3 days after we got them. And we had other ones that cancer, like a hemangiosarcoma, for example, we had some that completely disappeared. We had, dogs that were already metastasized, so they had, 5-6 spots. So day 0, we'd take the first PET scan, put them on the ketogenic diet, right after that. Mm-hmm. So we got a baseline. Then we put them on day 60, so 2 months in, we take another scan, and then day 120. So basically over a 4-month period. Okay. And then some dogs, depending on what was happening with their disease progression, we'd continue to do it. And, we ended up with like a 700-page Bible, if you will, of every single dog, what their medical history was, all the vet reports, and then the PET scans. And you can see some dogs, one of 3 things would happen. Dogs would die, but if they died, with the exception of one case, as we were talking about earlier, there really wasn't a problem with metastasis. So metastasis we could control. Mm-hmm. So the ketogenic diet really does a good job of halting cancer in its tracks.
And let's talk about metastasis.
Yeah, good point. So
some people might not know.
Is essentially when the cancer grows, when it spreads, I should say. So if you have a lung cancer and it goes to your liver, you have a liver metastasis. That's really what kills you, is when this thing starts spreading. So generally, when you hear about people that survive cancer, they catch it early, do a surgical resection, and then they catch it before it has spread.
So metastasis means that the cancer is now, the cells are now traveling throughout your entire body. That's correct. Metastasis. Okay.
Yep,
okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
Right. Yep. I know. Thanks for taking the time to define that. Yeah. And that's really the problem. And one thing that we saw of all the dogs we had, and I think we had, I'm going to throw a number, 120 dogs, something like that. Wow. We only had one dog that metastasized. While they were on the diet.
During the program.
Yeah. So we had a lot of dogs that had like mammary tumors or things, and you'd see it on the PET scan. And it would stay there. It would always reduce in intensity. So you'd always see it uptaking less glucose, in large part because sometimes the tumor would die, other times it would just shrink, other times it would stay there. But I don't think I ever saw anything that would even stay the same intensity. And then we had some like hemangiosarcomas, which is the number 1 killer of dogs. We had several that I can think of to this day. They're still running around, and you'd see like on PET scan 1, 6 spots, PET scan 2, 3 spots, and then PET scan 2, 3 spots, and then on the third PET scan, 0.
That's 120 days later. That
was 120 days later. Callie is one dog we talk a lot about. She was a Vizsla that they gave her. They said, yeah, if you want her, she'll still be around for a couple of weeks. So we took her, and she responded super well. Wow. And to this day, I just saw her. She was playing in the snow. This is 6 years ago or something.
And how old is she?
She's probably 11 or 12 now. Wow. No, she's probably 10, I think. Is wow. 10 or 11, yeah. And I think she got cancer when she was 4 or something like that.
And what kind of cancer was that one?
That was an epithelial hemangiosarcoma.
What does that mean?
So hemangiosarcoma is, if you go to Google, they don't even say, hey, don't try to do chemo, anything, just enjoy whatever time you have left with your dog. Pretty much hemangiosarcoma, by the time most people catch it, the dog bleeds out. Sometimes you can catch it, and I think you've got something like 3 to 5 months, something like that, if you catch it very early. Yeah. Lots of dogs die. Hemangiosarcoma, I think, is the number 1 killer. So we had a lot of dogs, and really, there's not much you can do for it. So clearly, a ketogenic diet makes sense. And what I think you're going to find now. So when we did this, there was 0 money going into nutritional research in terms of ketogenic diets. Now the NIH actually does quite a bit, and I think in 10 years. Ketogenic diets will be a part of standard of care for humans. Right. Now, no one's spending any money on dogs, but if it's good for humans, that's a pretty good clue that we should be looking at that for dogs. And it may be more important for dogs because, one thing we can talk about here, people talk about all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. And how do you validate it? How do you know it's real? With a ketogenic diet, my favorite part of the diet is you can take your dog, feed it whatever you're feeding it now, some store-bought food. Take its blood sugar. Go to Amazon.com, get a Precision Extra meter. It's a blood sugar meter. All you got to do is, find a little spot in your dog's paw. You can find videos on how to do it, or some people use the ear. Take your dog's blood sugar. You'll see that the average dog walking around is running about over 100 blood sugar.
The glucose levels.
Yeah, the glucose level is about 100 or more. High 90s, something like that.
Right.
If you then take that same dog, put them on a ketogenic diet for like 2 weeks, take the same blood sugar, you will see that blood sugar in the 50s to 70s, somewhere in there. If you also track ketones, which the Precision Extra will do, you will see that the ketones will be effectively zero. Normally, like every dog on the street is running about a 0. 0.1 might be possible in some dogs. And you'll see ketones run, the highest I think we ever saw without any kind of exogenous ketone, like a ketone salt that we would give them to drink, which is a thing we were testing. You might see dogs pull a 0.9. Generally, their ketones are not as high as a human, so 0.4 to 0.7 is a great number, but you'll see their blood glucose is, my dogs are routinely in the 50s and 60s. 70s is kind of high for them. So and then you can put them right back on the diet and their blood sugar will be back up. It's not something you have to believe. It really is something that you can verify for yourself.
And I mean, I'll make a statement here that I do ketogenic for my dog. It's hard for me because I can't stop with carbohydrates, but I feel better when I do ketogenic. And my dogs are all on ketogenic diet. This is why I want to talk. I want to have you on. We've got to get this information out to people because I think it's so critically important. And now I think I know the answer to this question. I think it's just cheaper, right? Like dog food is really a cheap product to make to fill it with potatoes or rice or beans or whatever. Is there anything else behind why people would feed their dogs anything but meats and vegetables, let's say, and fats?
No, I mean, I think you put your finger on it. There's a lot of conspiracy theories that are out there, and the problem is when you really look at them, scratch a little bit, there's not much to it. One conspiracy, if maybe you could call it that, manufacturers are paying attention to costs, obviously, and it is a lot cheaper to feed a dog carbohydrate than it is protein and fat. And in the, I think maybe the 30s or 40s is when the first dog food was made. And really it was a way, hey, how do we take this trash and turn it to cash? That's primarily the main thing. Also, you have more shelf stability. I mean, if you're going to feed your dog ground beef, let's say, you got to have a refrigerator. You can't just, when you board your dog, all these things are, we used to board our dogs and they were weird about feeding them, meat like that. So there's other minor things, but you're right. Cost is the biggest driver. So
one thing people always complain about, they always talk about, and vets, sadly, I'm not saying this against vets because I've got a lot of good friends who are vets. I don't think they receive the education, nor do they spend the time afterwards to educate themselves. Just like a lot of doctors I know, you and I are very health conscious. They're not really that into that, right? It doesn't really intrigue them as much. But they always talk about the bacteria, right? The evil bacteria from meats or vegetables that we're feeding our dogs raw meats, and it's so bad. Can we touch on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's two camps in the, not necessarily ketogenic, but maybe in primal feeding. I think it's pretty clear that dogs should be eating what they would be catching as prey, which is going to be meat and fat or protein and fat. And people are really freaked out by pathogens and things. And if you look at it, pathogens killed a lot of human beings. They've killed animals. I mean, it's a part of life. But you've got ketogenic diets that are raw and ketogenic diets that aren't raw. So, I think that's kind of marginally important. I do think that there's a lot of focus on it because they are educated about that. And there's reasons why dog food companies want vets to know about that. But so I'll give you an example. When we did Keto Pet, a lot of vets said, you're crazy. How do we know this is safe, et cetera, et cetera? Now, remember, dogs have been eating this way for hundreds of thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. They've only been eating dog food maybe since the 30s or 40s. So this whole concept of is it safe is really crazy. But now we sent an email out in the Keto Pet list 4 months ago. Hey, if you're a ketogenic friendly vet, let us know. Now, in 2014, when we started this, we couldn't find one. Now we had a lot of vets raising their hands saying, yes, I want to be on your vet locator. If you go to ketopetsanctuary.com, you actually see a vet locator if you want to find one near you. That's a really big change. So Yeah, and I just noticed the age of the vets. If a vet is in their early 20s, they talk about nutrition. And if a vet is older, it really is true. So that has changed. It's not like they are getting it in vet schools. There's just an interest. You said it earlier. They're just not that interested. You have a lot of friends that are physicians, and physicians that are younger, they think about nutrition in a way that, someone that's over 40, they don't really think of it that way. That's a huge generalization, but I found it to be true.
And we're both martial artists, right? So you have an extreme knowledge and interest in martial arts and fitness. I don't think I ever asked you this question. How did you get started in the martial arts early on?
Wow. There were a couple of shows, like as a kid, where I saw them. A lot of people have, like, maybe it was Bruce Lee for them, or Jean-Claude Van Damme. Yeah. And it was superhuman. And I just thought, that's not real. And then I realized one day, wait a minute, people train at this? So it's like, you're telling me that you're reading Batman comic, and all of a sudden you find out, oh no, there's a school. You go there and you become. Right. That was such an amazing concept that I didn't have to be who I was naturally, but I could train. And that happened when I was 13. So that was the inciting incident.
And did that also like spark you? Like with me, when I got into martial arts, I just got beat up every day. I was a kid from Germany who couldn't speak the language. I got beat up, and my mom put me in a judo class, and then later it just kept growing. My passion for martial arts. I don't think you weren't that kid who got beat up, right?
I always wished I was beat up, but no, I never got.
Because it's such a great story. Like, you're in great shape now,
story.
Right?
Yeah, no, I never got beat up.
Okay, no, I did. So did your interest? Because my interest went this way. Like, I was like, I can get strong. I can be this superhuman guy. I can be martial arts. I can do all this crazy stuff. Bruce Lee was like it for me. And then I also and later it kind of changed my thing. But Arnold Schwarzenegger was like the thing. Like, to be this amazing, like George Reeves, to look at these people, their bodies and stuff like that, like. You're in great shape. I mean, I think I'm in pretty good shape. Like, how did you put those pieces together, and when did that become a part of your quest, like your drive to be fit and to be strong and to be superhuman, like I think we are?
Thank you. That's very kind. That's been there for a long time. Martial arts really was the genesis. Mm-hmm. And when I was about 18, I realized, wait a minute, we are made of what we eat. Mm-hmm. And as I delved into that and read more and more, I really realized a lot of things like cognition and a lot of sleep problems, GI problems. A lot of people I know have GI problems. It really is nutritionally focused. And then just to tell you how there's a guy, Dominic D'Agostino, who's a researcher at the University of South Florida, former bodybuilder, kind of shares a lot of our ideas on nutrition and things. And he was the first guy who took something absolutely ridiculous, a diet, and made it sciencey. So he was the guy who introduced ketogenic diets. He's really maybe the godfather of ketogenic diet research. I think it can all trace back to him. Okay. He made researchers take a look at it, because he took rats and mice, I should say, and he put them on ketogenic diets, did hyperbaric oxygen with them, and he has a whole protocol, and he published that. And, when I wanted to do what I wanted to do, I wanted to use dogs. And he said, there's a guy you should reach out to. And his name's Q Collins. And he was really the first guy, even before Keto Pet, to take dogs, put them on ketogenic diets. And we moved him from the East Coast to California, and we collaborated on this project. And other people, there's a guy named Daniel Arago, who was really integral in that. And, it was 3 kids in a room, probably not kids anymore at this point. Right. But that was kind of the enthusiasm we had. And we were dumb enough to not realize, we'll get a PET scan and, things like that. We just kind of cobbled it together. Mm-hmm. We really weren't trying to sell this idea. We weren't trying to publish anything. We just wanted to know, are ketogenic diets what people are saying? We just couldn't get the data. We couldn't see the PET scans. I didn't see these supposed tumors shrinking. Where was that? Mm-hmm. So we just did it ourselves. And it was a $5.5 million project over, probably 3.5 to 4 years. And then, it continued. Then we started working with people all over the country, just kind of out of interest. And people would email us. And, if you go to the Keto Pet calculator, it tells you how to go to the grocery store and make ketogenic diet. There's nothing mystical or there is something mystical and magical about it. There's just nothing, impossible.
Difficult, difficult. And I did find that really, really easy. So when I first was investigating a ketogenic diet for my dog, I did look it up, and I went to the Keto Pet Sanctuary, and it's super easy. You just type in your dog's weight, their activity level, and what you want to use for fat, butter, coconut oil, whatever, and boom, it just gives you. You put in your email, and you get this, and it's free. And I think this is part of what intrigues me about you. You have a food company. We're going to talk about that. I mean, I'm addicted to your cinnamon Pop-Tarts. I mean, it's insane how much I'm addicted to them. But we're going to get into that in another conversation. But what intrigues me about you is you are like a student of life, right? Like I'm a student of life. Like I just want to learn everything. If I die at 120, it's just not enough time to learn all this crap I want to learn, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm intrigued about with you is you did this with the dogs, and this information it's out there, right? I can put this ketogenic diet together for my dog, and it's pretty simple. I mean, it's really actually more simple than cooking at home for your dog.
Yes, it is.
Because it's just like 3 ingredients, right? 3 or 4 little things. Now, what's your thought on supplementing? Like, in other words, let's say they go to the Keto Pet Sanctuary and they type in and they go, okay, I'm going to feed, 8 ounces of beef and this many little chia seeds, some of the seaweed calcium that I know you like. What about vitamins and extra minerals? Does a dog need those?
I don't think so. I can tell you that in humans, humans feel a lot better if they supplement minerals, which are probably the most boring supplement in the world. It's sodium, magnesium, potassium. But if somebody wants to be really just easy, if you give them meat, you just got to make sure there's enough fat there. You don't want like a super lean meat or chicken breast or anything like that. But dogs will thrive, and you'll see it in their coats and things like that. But I'm always thinking about how do you validate this stuff? So there's people that say, oh, they need this and they need that. Maybe, but how do you test for that? So the one supplement that I've been playing with that, I'm not that interested in really teaching people about. I'm interested in learning like you. So I sort of talk about this stuff to get other people to talk about what they've learned. We've played with omega-3 supplements, and I think I told you my dog, super healthy, no problems, but she developed a leg tremor, which was there for about 4.5 years. And I racked my brain saying, what can I do about this? And I tried lots of things. We would measure her C-reactive protein, which was super low. And that's a test that's not easy to get done, easy for a dog. University of Kansas has like a research version. Our vet always thought, you guys are crazy testing all this stuff. But we put her on an omega-3 supplement. First, we did a test called Omega Quant, which is it quantifies the amount of omega-3 in the red blood cells.
And you can get that online.
You can get it online, omegaquant.com. It's just a company. I do it for myself. A lot of my friends I've bought tests for just to see.
I'm one of them.
And it shows you, and it shows you what your level is. And it's the one supplement. Like, I love the idea of supplements. I just haven't found the reality to be, to back up what the claims people make. But we put her on in 3 months, her leg tremor was gone.
Wow.
Is there a relationship there? Probably, simply because she had it for 4.5 years prior. I tried lots of little things, was not able to get it to go away. So that is, that's one thing that may actually work. I have a friend as well who had a dog who had kind of a gait problem. And took his dog to several specialist neurologists. They looked at every single thing and said, hey, is there something wrong? And everyone said, no, there's nothing wrong with this dog. He also, we did the Omega Quant on his dog. His dog came back very, very low, which most dogs will. Most of the dogs that I see are like in the 2 or 3% range, and they consider 8 to 12% ideal.
Right.
And he put his dog on it, and he sent me a video. I didn't believe it, but his dog does not have that gait problem. So I think neurological issues, omega-3s may actually pan out to be really important. Which
are essentially fats, right? They're healthy fats.
Yeah, it's a 22-chain EPA and DHA, which is the marine version. It's an animal fat that we can't make. Dogs can't make them. So your brain, 60% of the fat in your brain is DHA. So
60.
Yeah. So it's a big deal. It makes sense. Some of the research on omega-3 has been a little mixed. Some people say, it's because they weren't using enough. But there's some big meta-analyses that have been done, mostly for human cardiovascular work. There's some amazing stuff on omega-3, and there's also some studies that people were sure was going to, show amazing results that didn't. So it's not clear. It's not like, omega-3s are going to solve everyone's problems. But I have another friend I put on, and she had like a diabetic neuropathy, and I had tried a couple other things with her, just kind of interesting. They didn't really work, and then the omega-3s did. So I think, when you test someone and they're in the low 2, 3, 4% range, and then you in 120 days, you can get them right back up if you supplement omega-3s, and you can test again, and they'll be in the ideal range. Yeah. That's something I'd like to see more of. I think we should be doing more of that with dogs.
Yeah, I'm really interested.
Maybe some of your listeners, will give you that data. If they have a tremor's a great one. All you got to do is go there. It's really simple. It's not very expensive. The supplementation's cheap, and then 4 months later you should see.
So let's talk about that for a second, okay? Because I did it with me and I did it with Goofy, and I came back normal, but Goofy came back low. Yeah. And then I've since been giving him a Now Food supplement, which I'm happy to put a link in the bio for people to try. let's say I'm going to run this test. Okay, because this is a big passion of yours, this whole thing. And we should delve deeper into this and maybe get some listeners to maybe, if they're interested, put a comment in the YouTube video down below about this. When that test comes back from OmegaQuant, it's based on a human standard, though, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Okay, so what is it going to show me as a result? Because if you do the advanced version, it gives you a whole bunch of stuff on page 7 through like 33.
Correct.
But on page 1 is the one you're fascinated with, right?
Yeah, actually, page 7 too is fascinating for a whole host of other reasons, especially for humans, because there's some really interesting things we can talk about there. But as far as dogs, that first page is the most important.
Right.
They've got like, I think 3 different tests, like a basic, a something, and a complete.
Right.
Really, the first one, the basic, is what you want to do. It'll show you a kind of like a thermometer level, red, yellow, and green.
Right.
Green would mean that you're between 8 and 12%. And what they do is they're measuring red blood cells, the membranes of the cell of red blood cells. It's a human standard, and there is no real accepted, hey, here's the ideal numbers. What they did is they looked at a lot of people, and they said, who has more cardiovascular events, what neurological issues. The company that's behind it is a science company. They do a terrible job of selling themselves. They don't make any claims. They're really, really tight. But I think they've done a really good job. They've looked at a couple other things that have come up since, and they've tested and said, hey, do we need to adjust our test? So they're one of those companies that's always doing what really makes the most sense. I think it's really a mammalian test. I don't think it's going to matter whether it's a dog or a human. This is just my opinion.
Okay, yeah.
But I don't think a dog's going to have a different level. That's not based on a ton of evidence, but I think it's pretty rational to say that a dog and a human are going to be, like pigs. I mean, we're going to be in that. Let's say this: all carnivore and omnivore type. If you're talking about a ruminant, that could be a different situation. But like dogs, humans, that's why dogs are a much better model for disease than a mouse model. Yeah. So omega-3s are very tied to inflammation. I think that's pretty well established. And I know that dogs, if you measure their CRP, which is C-reactive protein, it's a test. Pretty much everyone, your doctor does blood work. And in humans, it's ideal to use something called an HS-CRP, which is high sensitivity, because generally CRP tests cut off at 1. But if you're talking about ideal health, you actually want to be well below 1. So you want to get something that can, detect down below there. And low omega-3 levels are going to be correlated with a very high CRP level. So, and dogs generally have pretty high CRPs if they're fed normal diets.
So if a dog, if I'm doing this test on a dog and I see those levels in the red, yellow, and the green, you'd still kind of go by that because it's only measuring percentage of the blood, right? Yes.
And so whether it's a human or dog, if you're in the 2, 3, 4, 5, you're going to show up as like a red.
Okay,
You really want to get them out of that into the green most likely. And you would basically... You have to do a mathematics, which we'll have to maybe put on your website about the weight of the dog and what it would be. I've done enough friends of mine that I can see like roughly it's about 8 pills a day. If it's a larger person, a male, in 4 months we'll get them right back into that zone. So it doesn't take a lot. So for a dog, if you're talking fish oil pills, probably 4 or less. I don't use pills. I actually use a company called Nordic Naturals. The only reason I know about that is I know that they measure for lipid peroxidation. The only problem with these oils is you don't want to add it to like a dog food. A lot of companies do that. You don't want to.
Why?
Because it goes rancid so quickly. It's 22 carbons long.
Okay.
Even in UV, if you leave it out in the sun for a couple of hours, you're actually ingesting a peroxidized fat, which is really bad. So, I've seen reports. Most of the good brands really aren't peroxidized, but the only one that I know is rigorous about testing is Nordic Naturals. So I don't have any axe to grind. I think they're amazing or anything. I'd rather than have to do the research on every company. And then we just get it's called Children's DHA. And you can just pour it on the food because dogs are smart and they'll see the capsule and they'll just spit it out and eat the rest of the food. So we pour it on and it's like a teaspoon. It's really little. And you wouldn't want to like go overboard. That's why I think
that's my next question to you.
Because if you were to really just flood yourself with omega-3, you create cell membranes that are a little bit more prone to oxidation. So it's kind of like vitamin D. There is a sweet spot, and you can't just gobble down vitamin D pills. You shouldn't. You'll actually feel weird. Whereas with omega-3, you probably wouldn't feel it, but you would be creating potentially a problem. So. It's really simple. Testing is the way to go. And pretty much you test once, you see your baseline for a dog. you get them back to the normal level. And then if you're crazy, you'll test once a year. And, as long as you're not overdoing the omega-3s, they're going to stay right in that spot. The people that would be particularly interesting is people who, I'm like you. I'm always trying to stay ahead of it and not fix a problem, but let's get ahead of the problem.
Right.
But if you do have a problem, my dog had that leg tremor, it would be interesting to hear from people that had that, because I think that in 90 to 120 days, it'll go away. It's not like one of those things like it takes a year.
Right.
I think in 2 to 4 months, they're going to notice a difference. And when I say difference, I don't like slight ameliorations. I like, hey, it's gone.
Right.
So it'd be interesting if people are willing to do that. It'd be great to get that feedback.
Yeah, I would love to see people just get some information. Maybe we should just somehow in the future or now just get people who are interested in this and get a hold of me, or we can do something with Keto Pet and stuff. You talk a lot about the feeding of beef, and we've gone out to Fat Burger together, and I see, I try to, that's why I ordered after you, because I wanted to eat like you eat. I got you by a couple of years, but you're in amazing shape. So you basically eat like meat and very few vegetables, or do you eat a lot of vegetables?
I used to eat a lot of vegetables,
okay,
but I have moved, pretty much here's what it comes down to. The less interested I am in the food, the more I should eat it. So what do I want?
Okay.
I'm the guy, if I could eat whatever I want, I'd eat at a gas station. That's the type
like
of food.
carb max, right?
And the really crappy, cinnamon rolls and things like that.
Love it.
I never really was a big meat guy, but what do I mostly eat at this point? Meat. And I think that there's, I have no GI problems. So I have a lot of friends that have GI problems, and I always found it strange, but if they remove vegetables, they did better. So,
wait, removing vegetables help their GI problems?
Yeah, there's people with autoimmune. So a lot of gastrointestinal problems probably map back to an autoimmune condition. And remember that those proteins are different. Like, you're made of meat.
Right.
If I cut you apart, you are meat.
Yeah.
So the proteins that are in vegetables are definitely more, I should say this, in my opinion, they're more likely to spark an autoimmune, or I should say an immune response, versus meat. So
talk about that for a second.
Sure.
So, because I'm intrigued by this. I was a vegetarian for 10 years, but I still snuck in eggs and stuff on the side, tuna fish. But this whole thing, because people say, and I'm really against, like a friend of mine, Drew, said, if you're a vegetarian because you feel bad killing the animal to eat it, I admire you for that. But if you're lying to me and telling me I'm going to be healthier by being a vegetarian, I resent that.
I like Drew.
Right?
I think I'd gravitate more towards a vegetarian diet. Vegan would be pretty tough.
Yeah.
If I just ate what I wanted, I'd tend to be like tortillas and things.
Yeah.
But so I don't eat that, and I don't think this is good news. And a lot of people try to sell a ketogenic or a carnivore diet as like, oh, it's this great thing, you get to eat steak all day. I've never really been a huge meat fan eater, but it's pretty much mostly what I ate. Like you saw, burgers and steak and things like that. And you will feel amazing. Cognition, you never get tired. And so it's amazing. You hold on to a lot of muscle mass more easily. So that's kind of how I've ultimately gravitated to eating. Is it's gotten simpler and simpler. I was really focused on a lot of the minutiae, but at the end of the day, if you look at what we're made of made of meat, and eating meat kind of makes sense.
Okay, so here's the argument we're going to hear, right? People are going to say, well, okay, so we're made of meat, we should eat meat. What about an elephant? Elephant's made of meat, and they eat, and a gorilla. And I've got a theory about it, because I've been to Africa, and I've watched gorillas eating like 18 hours a day.
That's right.
Right? Like, we can't do that. Let's talk about that for a second, because that's the key, right?
Yeah, you raise a great point. If you look, so they do eat 18 hours a day. They have an enormously long digestive tract. And the reason we don't spend that much time eating, and the reason we were able to build cities and, missile guidance systems is because we, fire. So cooking denatures protein, makes it much more bioavailable. And then getting stuff out of plants, there's a reason cows have 5 stomachs. The big thing vegetarians say is, well, an ox, they're huge. True, but they're completely built differently. So, I think, what Drew says, like, you and I are both animal lovers.
Yeah.
The idea of hunting, I'm not a hunter, and that doesn't appeal to me. Yeah. No problem with it. And it really comes down to, if you're going to survive, you're going to kill. Things are going to die.
Yeah.
Don't love that system. Seems kind of broken.
I hate it, yeah.
Despite that, from a health standpoint, you're right. I'm not going to lie to people.
Yeah.
You're going to function optimally if you are a meat eater.
Like, I had the hugest pet peeve with this vegan dog food stuff, right? I was furious about it. In LA City shelters, which I've dedicated 10 years plus of my life to help them go to almost no kill, had these people were actually telling the shelter to feed them a vegan diet. And one dope said, I feed my dog like peanut butter and this and that. And the diet was like insane, like how crappy it really, really was. And, their thing was, and I admire people who are vegans, if they're going to say that, but, I admire people who are hunters, right? Like, I think if you can go out and kill that elk and slaughter it and you're going to eat it, in my opinion, you're the true person, right? To me, like, I think I'm a hypocrite because I'm going to go to the steakhouse, I'm going to order Bel Campo meats or whatever, and I'm going to cook them up and I'm going to look away because if I had to do it, I would starve to death. Right? I really would.
Sure. I think a lot of people would agree with you.
Right. But the idea that I just think, I didn't invent the system. Right. I mean, if believe in God, I believe in God. God invented the system. And there's maybe in another sphere of existence, like these animals are like on thrones or something, But the whole idea that feeding an animal, especially a carnivore, there's a big difference between a ruminant carnivore and an omnivore. I mean, because of the way they digest their proteins. Like I said, if I watch gorillas, literally they're doing nothing but foraging and eating, and elephants are eating nonstop, with a lion sleeping, roaming around. He gets up, he kills a zebra, eats it, and he's done.
Yeah.
Right? It seems like a better system. I want to talk about the thing you said, the fire, how it did something to the proteins. I think that was really, you've talked about this before, and I keep meaning to ask you again about it. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, there's I'm going to guess 10 to 15 years ago, one of the dominant scientific theories that came out is, hey, the reason we have big brains is because of fire. And if you go back and you see, I think we've had fire for maybe 200,000 generations. Mm-hmm. That's what allowed our brains to grow. Because if you eat the same food raw, you will not get the same amount of nutrition out of it. So that's one argument why feeding dogs raw, you get to feed them a little more because they can't get as much out of it. But humans, if we had not found a way to control fire, mm-hmm. we would not be who we are. And we certainly wouldn't be doing this podcast.
Wow.
And that was kind of I don't know if it was radical, but it was certainly a new idea. And people have really looked at it and people say, you know what, that's really what allowed us to do. Because basically what fire does is it denatures protein. So it basically,
what does that mean?
Like proteins are these big, bundle up globs, if you will. And when you denature it, you straighten it out more. You can do that with like urea if you're doing a scientific experiment, or you can do it with heat. Heat and urea work really well. And people think that the name denature, oh my gosh, you're destroying the protein. Because denature kind of sounds, I don't know, you're doing something bad. Not really. In fact, like egg white, if you cook an egg white, you'll actually get more out of it. So if you were talking about muscle building, mm-hmm. or let's say you're in a starvation situation, if I could give you access to cooked food, it would be much better for you in terms of your ability to assimilate that, et cetera. So that's why they think our brains were able to get big, is we were able to kind of break away, because we're the only animal that uses fire.
Right.
And I'd say that a lot of scientists would agree with the fact that, if we had not found out how to control fire, we would still be uncivilized. Okay,
so how does that play into the idea of feeding cooked food to your dog versus a raw food, like let's say meats?
Yeah, some people take a really strong ideological position on this. At Keto Pet, we started with all raw, so we fed everything raw. There's a guy who did his PhD in animal nutrition, and he's he really did some amazing work. He basically took 3 different bowls, a carb bowl, a protein bowl, and a fat bowl. And he would let dogs go into a room where they had all 3 bowls, and they would videotape them, and they'd watch what the dog ate. Mm-hmm. And then they would randomize with like a statistical thing so that it couldn't be, they couldn't fool themselves. And they would put the dog in over like several months. Mm-hmm. And they noticed that dogs, I can't remember the exact numbers, but I'm going to give you the first one was like a pure carb bowl. The other was a pure protein. The other was a pure fat bowl. Dogs settled at around close to 60-40, 60% fat, 40% protein. And around there, and then the carbs were like 3 to 5%, something like that. Okay. So it wasn't quite 60-40. It was like 57 or something like that. Mm-hmm. But around a 60-40 protein split, and they never went to the carb, which is interesting if they're free feeding. Yeah. The one thing he noticed if they had been kibble fed and just mm-hmm. regular dog food, they tended to eat a little bit more protein in the first week or so, mm-hmm. and then they started eating more fat. So dogs might be at the point where you can actually trust their nose and their digestive system. I don't think as humans we can, because if you put a Snickers bar to a prehistoric man or woman,
kill him, they'd eat it right away.
They would have eaten it. They wouldn't have. And I don't think we have those control mechanisms. I think we're built to, if you get access to honey, gorge yourself. Oh my gosh, you have fruit, eat as much as you can.
Right.
I don't think we have that, but dogs may actually, if you give them choice. I was really surprised. Somebody else, there was another company I read about too that did the same thing, and their macronutrient split was slightly different, but it was around 60% fat, 40% protein, and I think they were 7% carb. But no dog went above that.
Wow. So let's address that, because the theory behind ketogenic is this idea of fats, protein, fats, and fiber, I guess, right? Just the fiber to keep the digestive tract clean.
Well, it's interesting you say that. I'll say it's protein and fat. Fiber is an ancillary thing.
Okay.
There's some pretty good research coming out that fiber actually may do the opposite of what people think. They did some constipation research with humans, and removing fiber fixed the problem. Wow. So fiber is, when you eat fiber, you turn it into a short chain fat. So what you end up absorbing, if it's a soluble fiber, in the lower GI, you have bacteria, and they digest the fiber. You and I can't digest it, but they can. Okay. And you and I end up absorbing those short chain fats. So even when you eat broccoli, right, the part that you can't digest, the fiber, turns into fat. So that's why fiber doesn't really have any detriment to a ketogenic diet. It's not going to raise your blood sugar or anything like that. Is it critical? By no means. And over time, I know people that are on ketogenic diets for a long time, they can go no fiber for years, no problem. So that's definitely for transitioning. I think people need to think about that, but I don't think fiber by any means is critical. And
when we talk about this fat, I know one of the things you like is 80-20, right? Is it 80, beef, you mean? Yeah, 80-20 beef.
Okay, so I'm glad you bring that up. So 80-20 beef is how manufacturers, they do it by weight. When I was talking about 60-40, et cetera, I'm doing it by percentage of calories, which is really the way you should look at it. Like 1% milk versus full fat milk. Sounds like 1% milk is very little. 1% milk is almost the same amount of fat as 2% because it's by weight. Well, once you remove the weight of the water, which has 0 calories, it doesn't make much difference. So the ideal way would be to look at it. So 80-20 beef is actually something like, I'm just going to take a crack here. It's probably 58% protein. And, 40 whatever percent, 42% fat. So it's really not 80-20 is by weight, but really from a calorie standpoint, it's closer to 60-40.
So if I buy 80-20 meat, which would mean 80% lean and 20% added fat, right? It's mixed together.
It's actually, yes. Yeah, exactly. By weight.
Then if I were to break that down in a lab, what I'm actually looking at, you're saying, is 58% protein and 48% fat. Because even in the lean meat, there's still a certain degree of fat?
No. It's because they're saying that 80% lean by weight, 40% by weight. But doing it by weight doesn't make sense because remember, fat has 9 calories per gram. Okay. Protein has 4 calories per gram. So when you do it by weight, it gets really complicated because you're like, whoa, 80-20. Whereas when you do it by calories, it already takes that into account. Okay. So that's why a lot of ketogenic diets, people that do ketogenic diets say, hey, I use a 4-to-1 ratio. That means 4 parts fat to 1 part protein. Right. Now a 4-to-1 ratio is 90% fat, 10% other protein. Okay. But a 2-to-1, which sounds like half, right? Yeah. That's 83 to 17. So 83% fat, 17% protein. Even though it went from 4-to-1 to 2-to-1. If you go to 1-to-1, oh my God, that's going to be, it's 63% fat, and whatever.
So where does that terminology come from? That 1-to-1, 2-to-1, 4-to-1.
So it comes because when people are in the food manufacturing business, they care about the weights of things. But you and I who eat the food, we care about the percentage of the calories. Yeah. So a lot of people say, like you were talking about earlier about vegan diets for dogs or for human beings. If your goal is to be low carb, and you're going to eat a plant-based diet, you're going to end up eating way more carb because you can't get those proteins with a lot of associated carb. Whereas in the animal world, very few of these sources have any carb. Okay. So if you eat eggs, if you eat beef, you're going to get nothing. There's no carbs, right? And you're going to get plenty of fat and protein. So that's one of the reasons why, if you ever put a dog on a plant-based diet, not only are you giving them proteins that are very deficient in certain amino acids, you're also going to increase carb just necessarily by the nature of plant-based foods.
Maxing their carbs out.
You are definitely taking them up, yeah.
And so the theory too is people say, eat a big bowl of pasta the night before you run because it's going to give you all that energy because you can derive energy from carbohydrates. But the theory is, I mean, I've seen a lot of animals like lions and zebras and the meteors like cheetahs and leopards and these animals eat an immense amount of meat, no carbs, and they have energy, right? I mean,
they do. That's because you can turn both the backbone of fat, that glycerol backbone, into carb, and you can turn protein into carb as well. So what's nice about doing that is your body's controlling the amount of glucose. Whereas if you're eating Twinkies, you can't. And your body is like saying, oh my gosh, what am I going to do with all this? So a lot of times people say that, carbohydrate is the body's preferred energy source. But it really, in my opinion, isn't. Because if I were to feed you, there's 4 macronutrients. You got protein, carbs, fat, but you also have alcohol. Alcohol is 7 calories per gram. And if I fed you all 4, what do you burn first? Alcohol.
I think so.
Does that mean alcohol is your body's preferred fuel source? What do you burn next? You burn carbohydrate. Then what do you burn after that? Either protein or fat, depending. The reason for that is alcohol is poisonous, and carbohydrate is as well. That's why the difference between you and you diabetic is 1/4 teaspoon of sugar in your bloodstream. That's 4 calories.
So wait, I want to touch on that.
Sure.
So if you took your bloodstream and I took 1/4 teaspoon of sugar and injected it into your veins, you'd be diabetic.
Correct. That's the difference between me or pretty much anyone listening to this. It's 1/4. That's how tightly controlled blood glucose is. So when you go to your doctor and he says, hey, you're doing really well. And then you go back 6 years later and he says, ooh, you're diabetic. All you did is you added 4 calories to your entire blood circulation. That's how tightly controlled it is. So carbohydrate is, your body treats it. A poison is probably too strong of a word. Actually, I guess not. It burns you from the inside. If you leave it unchecked, you'll lose your toes, you'll lose your hands. Alcohol is the same way. It's just a higher level of alert. So that's why your body's, hey, I got to get rid of this.
Wow, that's fun. That's amazing. And so with the dogs, let's just circle back to Keto Pet, because this is what we're originally started talking about.
Sure.
These animals, what was cool is because you didn't want to do a science experiment, like put these dogs on, this crazy stuff. You actually wanted to use diet to change, but you also did do a lot of, you did the hyperbaric chambers, and you did radiation on the dogs too, if they needed a tumor.
We did. Right? So we did standard of care, if we could. And because there's a couple of things that ketogenic diets are interesting for. I think that the least controversial thing today, most people, oncologists would say, a ketogenic diet does seem to reduce the amount of chemotherapy you need. It does seem to, it improves the outcomes of radiation. There's good science on that. And if you were going to be the most stingy person, that you'd agree with that. Then if you want to go a little further, you'd say, it does seem to there's a lot of quality of life things for humans. It makes them feel better. They don't have as much nausea. So ketogenic diets, basically what you're doing is you're removing the insult of high glucose. Now, if you were to go to chemo, a lot of times they'll say, drink milkshakes, keep your energy up, et cetera, et cetera. But that's really, in my opinion, bad information. You mentioned something earlier about like before a race, they'd tell you to carb up and eat things. One of the ladies that worked with us at Keto Pet, Terry Swanson, she kind of put her finger on this. I think about 15 years ago, she had a friend that had breast cancer. She went just to support her, to the doctor appointment. And the oncologist told her, hey, you know what, we're going to get your PET scan tomorrow. Try to eat a lot of carbohydrate tonight because it'll make everything glow hotter in the PET scan tomorrow. And she was not a sophisticated scientist by her own admission. And she said, that always bothered me. So wait a minute, you're telling me that if my goal is to make the cancer burn brighter, I eat carb. Couldn't we restrict carb? So she had a dog named Jenny that had a mammary tumor. She loved her dog, kind of like you with Goofy. And she said, I'm just going to restrict carbs. And this is about 15 years ago. And she did, and the dog and you could feel it was a little mammary tumor. It went nowhere. The dog survived. I knew the dog when she was probably maybe as late as, 11, 12, something like that. I don't know what her status is right now, but the dog never had a problem with cancer. So,
but I think I had somebody else on the show, and I've talked to people, who they say, oh my God, my dog got cancer. I'm just going to feed him milkshakes and hamburgers and just give him the greatest life and this and that. And I would think to take the opposite approach. Like, okay, my dog's not well. What can I do to make it's not like the dog is 18. Like Boz is 18 years old. I mean, he's upstairs. He's pretty much, in his golden days at this point. But he wasn't eating. He was, we had him on kibble his whole life. But I started giving him food and stuff, more nutritious, higher in fats. I do give him rice and stuff like that. But there's a place I was going with this. I think the main idea, the idea is, why not just, it's not like you're giving the dog like, denatured alcohol and like, and grass to eat. You're actually giving them something they really love, right? And if the dog has something, I mean, treating the dog with whatever the Western medicine might be, or radiation or whatever, and adding this diet, I can tell you my dogs love the ketogenic thing. Like they love the meat, the organ meats and the fats and stuff like that. And I've seen them all. I mean, I had Goofy's blood done a few months back, and his blood is never better. He's 11 years old, and it's all ketogenic. He's got, I mean, Janet jumps on me all the time. Like she'll give him like these other dogs, one of her dogs like a piece of cheese. I said, Goofy didn't get a piece of cheese, did he? Let's touch on that for a second. Like where are those lines? Like, I mean, you're super disciplined. I eat chocolate all the time. I can't help myself.
Yeah. So you're in a very, very small percentage of dog owners. And I would say the single biggest disappointing thing that I've seen, one of the reasons people have so many problems with their dogs is love. Because they love it and they want to do the same thing for their dog. And you're right. If you actually give a dog the opportunity to have a hamburger or a steak versus a peanut butter cup, they'll go for the steak. Yeah. But because people prefer the peanut butter cup, I've seen people destroy their dog's nutrition, and it's tough. The whole thing with treats and like to me, what you're doing makes complete sense. Now, very few people are even going to get blood work for their dog, let alone feed it properly. And you're titrating the calories. I just secretly pinched all of your dogs here, and they're all super, super lean. They're the way they, so I can see their energy level. But it's a psychological problem. And I think one of the most important things, there's a lot of people that can do it for their dogs, even if they can't do it for themselves. Right. But there's a lot of people that can't do it for either. Yeah. And it's I do think understanding it. I know a few people that actually went to Amazon, bought that Precision Extra meter. Yeah. And when they saw the blood sugar difference, that was enough to keep them like, wow, I was able to see the invisible. Yeah. So for some people, I think that helps. But
maybe they don't see the whole thing. So I do Goofy's blood sugar. And when he started, he was in the 90s, right before I switched him over. And now he's routinely always in the 60s, right? Never over. I mean, if he's at 70 it's something, but it also depends when you take his blood. Like if he runs around, comes downstairs and then comes upstairs, his blood sugar is a little bit higher.
Actually, that's a great point. Same with a human. If you go run some steps, your livers are going to dump glucose and you're going to get a very high reading. Right. You're absolutely right. You want it when the dog's at rest. Yeah. That's when you want to take it. I'm really surprised how much you've done.
Well, I've got a good teacher here. Tell me this question. Let's say I'm going to do my dog's blood sugar, and he gets up and he runs downstairs and comes back upstairs. How long do I have to wait until after? Like, when can I test it? Do I have to wait till the next day?
No, hour. I would at least wait an hour. 1 hour. He's got to burn through all that glucose because your liver will say, "Oh, I need activity." It might dump a bunch of glucose. An hour is probably good, yeah. Okay. I mean, two for sure. Yeah. But an hour is probably good enough.
And if the blood sugar, so if let's say normally, I don't even know what the normal blood sugar is for a person that's healthy, what would that be?
Really, at rest, they want to see it under 100 for sure.
Okay, under 100.
For sure.
Okay, so let's say it should be high. That's high for what we're talking about.
If you're constantly running around, that you're pre-diabetic.
What's yours? Like if you wake up in the morning?
It's funny. My blood sugar's in the morning. I've hit 100 before, usually in the 80s. Wow. But like during the day, I mean, I like to see it under 80. Okay. But it's a matter of protein. If my protein's high, my blood sugar's a little higher. Okay. If my protein's lower, my blood sugar will be lower. So it really, because I don't really eat carbohydrates. So yeah. I don't know how you do it. Matter of.
You don't even eat those Pop-Tarts?
I
you do,
I eat Legendary Foods Tasty Pastry, but no, real Pop-Tarts I don't.
No, me neither. No, but I eat the Legendary Pastry.
Oh, yeah. No, yeah.
I was going to have them on the table, but I would have eaten them. That's great. So if people want to, and promise me you're going to come back on.
Oh, yeah. Okay. This is the first of many.
Okay, I hope so, because we're going to talk about visionary food and all that stuff. And I'll put a link to it below. Sure. I believe in it. I feed it. If people want to take a step in the right direction with feeding. And again, what I admire about you, and I've said this to several people, you sold your company for a lot of money, right? And a lot of people, probably me included, would have just went and lived on an island and just really enjoyed my life. But you took that money, and you did some other good stuff with it, I know, but you dumped $5 million. That's a lot of money, right? You dumped that money into trying to figure out not only, I mean, I think there's a piece there where you think, okay, this will be great, it'll be a business and this and that, but I think deep down inside, I think I know you better just from having spoken to you. You really care, and you really wanted to make a difference, because still to this day, you sell dog food, but you make the information available for free.
You're probably giving me a little too much credit.
Maybe, but I don't think so.
The reason I did Keto Pet, remember we did that before we sold the company.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
That was the company was doing very well, and we said, hey, here's an interesting research project. To me, I'm really interested in mysteries and knowledge.
Okay.
So that was my primary driver. Was I thought, oh my gosh, there's something here, and there's no real way to figure this out, and people are talking about it, but you can't really find out if it's real. So it was just a research question. There was no interest in a business. Only years later, after the number one question we got at Keto Pet is, isn't there something I could just buy that we developed a business? But that's not really the driver, as you know. I mean, but it isn't that I want to do good. Does it feel good? And do I love seeing dogs? And we get so many cool stories.
Yeah.
That's the most interesting part to me.
Yeah.
But that wasn't the driver. It really was intellectual curiosity.
But did something about it drive you? Like, did you have a dog that died that you were like, damn, I could have saved this dog?
Well, no. So here's what's interesting, because you and I are both dog people, but you make me pale. I pale in comparison. I was really, if Keto Pet was an attempt for humans.
Oh,
so I was really interested in answering human nutritional questions and human cancer.
Okay.
And I got into the dogs in a big way, because you can't. I mean, think about it. There was just so many. It was so cool what you were doing. That I've fallen in love with it, and now I kind of look at it in two ways. I look at canine and human nutrition. They're just flip sides of the same coin. Yeah. But really, no, it wasn't because I wanted to help dogs. I've had dogs, and dogs, I don't have children, so dogs are our children, and my wife and I love it. And it feels great, but really the genesis, if I'm honest, was, here's an interesting question. I want to see if this is true for humans. Oh, wait, dogs can't drive themselves to McDonald's, so they're going to be the perfect ones. Ketogenic diet's the biggest problem with ketogenic diet. Number one is, as you know, adherence. That can be challenging for a lot of people. But the best thing about a ketogenic diet is if you cheat, I can tell instantly. And a dog, we were doing 3 blood readings a day on a dog in the beginning. So we have thousands of blood glucose readings. In fact, one of the things we published in a vet journal, the average blood glucose for all of our dogs that were not fed ketogenic diets was about just under 100.
Okay.
98.7.
Not fed. So they were fed grains and everything. Okay.
The average blood sugar of all dogs, if I recall, was 61.4. And that's thousands of readings. So pretty much 60 versus 100, almost a 50% delta. So it's, that's why I say it's not something you have to believe. It's not like organic. Organic is really good. Well, can you show that to me in some sort of objective way? No. Ketogenic diets, you don't need to believe anyone. You can test it for yourself, as you've done. Yeah,
I have. And it's amazing. And I like to, but I find myself, you don't have that. Like if I eat one hamburger with a bun, I'm pretty full. But if I eat 2 hamburgers without a bun and just lettuce, I'm still hungry.
Yes.
Right, and that's probably something we should talk about in another show. But the dogs, do they feel that too? Do you think?
No, I mean, one of the things is, I don't know how good your fat burning is, but so ketogenic diets are kind of there's a gateway where when I first did them, if I fasted, I'd get a headache.
Yeah, me too.
That's because your body is addicted to glucose and you're burning glucose.
Oh, okay.
And in order to go ketogenic, you have to go out of your way to take your fat way up to ramp up your lipolytic enzymes for a while, like weeks and weeks, maybe months. Oh. And your protein down. So you're teaching yourself to burn fat. Once you've been there for a while, you can fast. You don't really feel it. Like I used to get hangry if I didn't have food.
I'm the same way.
Now I might be hungry, but even if I'm really hungry, I'm not hangry. And I don't have a headache. I don't have the performance deficit. In fact, there might be a slight euphoria. So, and that's quite frankly, there's that kind of, we'll call it a no man's land. If you don't get to the other side, it's just suffering. So I bet that if you went, if I locked you in a room for 2 months and I got you just protein and fat, by the end of that 2 months, when you ate that burger, you'd be kind of satisfied. Because I remember that. Like, it's funny, something was really missing without that starch component. Right. But after a while, you won't. And dogs, they seem to have a little bit more metabolic flexibility. It doesn't take them as long. Like we were measuring, some dogs that had been fed kibble their entire lives. They were eating tons of carbs. Within 72 hours, some of them took almost a week to get there, but 72 hours. Whereas a human, the suffering phase is a lot longer for a human. Yeah, so
it's really bad. Okay, so if people want to do the right thing, Keto Pet Sanctuary.com. They can go there. We'll talk about visionary food another time. But just to experiment with it, why not try to get your dog onto Oh, really? Thought that? And there's no, I mean, the big misnomer is always going to be, increasing your protein is going to hurt your kidneys and it's going to the bacteria. So if they want to do it, they can cook their food, right?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, take your beef and bake it, make a meatloaf, right?
Sure.
Or something like that.
Absolutely.
You have no problem with that?
No, not at all.
Okay. So if you got a problem with it, then what people have a problem with it, they should consider that.
Absolutely.
Especially if they've got kids or old people and they're worried about diseases or something like that.
Or some sort of, some dogs have some, issues that like surgery. They don't want to make sure, just cook it, no problem.
Okay.
But you do raise one more thing we should talk about.
Yeah, please.
One thing that we get emails all the time, which this was not something we even considered, hot spots and so-called allergies.
Mm-hmm.
I won't go as far as to say they don't exist, but most of that is an inflammation problem because of carbs. The number of people have said, oh my gosh, I had fluffy, we did topicals, we had all these, we put her on steroids, we had a steroid pack, this has been with her for her whole 11 years. They put her on a ketogenic diet, all of a sudden the dog doesn't lick, there's no hot spots, anything. That's probably the number one biggest email we get. Of course, we have cancer, we've got all these other energy. Those are a little harder to measure. We've seen pictures of a forearm of a dog that's raw, and then 3 months later they don't lick it anymore. And I have some friends that one in particular I can think of, a pug. That was his life, and then as soon as she switched over the food, all of a sudden, so there's something there. I really think that's probably autoimmune driven by the carbohydrate. Dogs don't have the same tolerance for carbohydrates as humans do. Humans need to watch their carbs, but dogs really, really need to watch.
So you're saying a dog's tolerance is much worse?
It's much worse for carbs. Yeah, they're omnivores. Well, technically, they're not like obligate carnivores like cats,
right?
But they don't tolerate high blood glucose well, and this isn't really known. Like I think I told you a story where our vet called us from a very, let's just say a very high end. I know a lot of the vets that work there. This is this place is amazing. It's like a hospital for humans,
right? And
they called us and said one time, hey, we're worried about your dog's blood glucose. We want to give her an IV drip.
Because she was low. Because
she's
ketogenic.
Right. And my wife said, oh my gosh, what's wrong? What's her number? Oh, she's 60. Well, and my wife's like, she's always in the 60s, 50s or 60s. What was weird to me is this is a vet that she's not super old. She's young, but she sees a lot of dogs, and these are LA dogs that have all the money in the world.
Yep.
She thought a blood glucose under 80 was abnormal, and they don't like to see it under 80. That means the dogs she's seeing are 90s, 100, 110, 120, and they were going to give her a glucose drip. Now, in human medicine, they would never do that. They would never say, no, because the dangers of blood glucose are well known in humans. I mean, diabetes is running rampantly. There's no doctor out there saying, we got to get your blood sugar up. And if your ketones are high, you can be in the 40s in the old days prior to ketogenic diets being known. People are like, oh my gosh, your blood glucose in the 50, you're gonna pass out in a coma. No, because ketones rise, so you now have substrates to handle that energy you need. But it just goes to show that basic dog physiology is still not well understood when it comes to things like blood glucose, which is very easy to measure. It's like a CRP test. You should be able to order an HSCRP for your dog. You can't. You have to go to this University of Kansas thing, get this weird kit, and send it in. So yeah. But
so the low in the 60s is obviously very good.
Yeah, I think it's for a dog. If your dog is between 50 and 70, you're doing a really good job. I think. Is there specific data that shows that dogs are going to live longer in humans? There's a ton of data.
Oh, there is?
Oh, tons.
Oh, I didn't know.
There's just not in dogs because no one spent the money on it. No one's that focused on dog longevity.
But they spend so much time. I mean, if you think about it, I remember I've talked to doctors before, and they said the first thing they do in medical labs, they dissect a dog. They put a dog to sleep, they dissect the dog. So if the study is there to show that humans can live longer and have a better, healthier life with higher fats, lower blood sugars and stuff like that, it would just stand to reason that it'd be the same with dogs, right?
It would. If you look at centenarians, when they were studying these people that lived over 100, they said, oh my God, we're going to tease out the secrets. What about this guy? Oh, he smokes. What about her? Oh, she sits around on a couch all day. And they're like, wait a minute, these people they live very different lives, but they're living to 100.
Yeah.
But there was one thing they all shared.
What?
Well, actually two.
Okay.
None of them were fat. And they all had very low fasted insulin levels.
Okay.
So if there were one biomarker of longevity and maybe even health span, it's fasted insulin. So if you go into your doctor, and this one, unfortunately, you have to go to your doctor, and you just fast for, probably 12 hours is the recommendation. And there's a reference range, which starts at 3. So 3 to plus up to, I don't know what the high end is. That's probably the single best measure. And what does that have to do with? Your blood glucose and your ability to tolerate carbohydrate. In my opinion, you really want to be a 2 or a 3. That's
Okay.
actually below the lowest level. When
Okay.
mine's are run in a 2, to give you an example.
Wow.
And this isn't done on dogs a lot, and that's something we actually probably should have looked at more. We didn't. But fasted insulin on a dog fed a carbohydrate diet versus one fed a ketogenic meat-based diet, that's going to be, so that maps very well in humans. It just hasn't been done in dogs. And the one thing they're doing now is they're using something called rapamycin on dogs for dog longevity. But again, it's because rapamycin, people that make it, they have a vested interest in, hey, let's see if this works.
What is that, rapamycin?
Rapamycin, it's they found it many years ago on Easter Island, deep in the dirt. So it's kind of an interesting story. But essentially, what it does, they give it to people that do liver transplants, organ transplants, because it depresses your immune system. But one of the things that it does is it depresses something called mTOR, which is your protein synthesis system. And by depressing that, it seems to make animals live a lot longer. They've done it with lots of animals. There's a really long-term study with dogs, which I think is going to end up producing very long-lived dogs.
Yeah.
And these are dogs fed terrible diets, I'm sure. So it really has a strong effect. I think ketogenic diets are just affecting mTOR without the need for rapamycin.
I see. So you can get the same results.
You can...
Or similar. It's the same idea, right?
I think you can actually get better results.
Oh, wow.
So this is, a case where going directly for the target is probably better than kind of messing things up and trying to fix it with an outside thing. I'm totally all about it.
Yeah, of course, sure.
I'm not against it in any way, but yeah, it's so I think it's very rational to say low blood sugars, low fasted insulin, much better longevity in humans. There's a lot of data on that. Yeah. It probably exists in dogs, but not nearly as much as for humans. But it's certainly it's not going to be the other way. Like, you want dogs to have tons of blood glucose. So
right. Okay, we got to continue this conversation because this is just beyond fascinating. You're the most knowledgeable person I've ever talked to about this fitness idea stuff. All this stuff. It just intrigues me to just get to suck this information out of you because it's just so cool. I think this podcast is going to be. If nobody else listens to it, I will listen to it 1,000 times. I swear because I'm going to have to go back through and write down all your stuff. Which every time when we have lunch or we hang out, I come home and Janet goes, "What'd you guys talk about?" And I said, it just went right through me. It's like the way you talk, it's so simple to grasp, but it's like, wow, there's so much.
Well, thank you.
There's so much. It's incredible. Your knowledge is really, really spectacular. So thanks for being here. As soon as I end this podcast, I'm going to talk to you about the next time you're going to come back. So
sure.
Guys, thank you for tuning in. This was an amazing chat for me. I think you're going to come away from this talk with so much information to help your health, which I'm all about, but also to help your dog's health, which what better, you've got this responsibility for your dog, give them the best life possible. Don't take the chances that you don't need to take because you got all the information here. And I'll see you in the next show. Take care.